The man of tomorrow is here. It is time for your Wednesday Zomia ONE Underground Q&A, coming out on a Wednesday. You know, I realize that this week's Sovereign Tech, for the first time in a little while, had come out a couple days late, ended up coming out on a Tuesday night. You got to understand that I had an incredible weekend, and I will tell you about it at some point in the future. In fact, I might not be alone on that. Ellen and I might talk about it, but it was a very fascinating, anyway, there's certainly a review of a concert to come on the Hard and Fast podcast, but it was a lot more than that. Stuff that had been planned for a while that literally for months, it finally came to fruition. It was very interesting. And just a lot of things, solidified in my mind, and I'm sure I'm going to share it with you in the near future, some of which I shared in that episode of Sovereign Tech recently, episode 337. Which it hasn't even been out a day, and I already have a ton of reviews coming in from that. People really loved that episode, and I'm honored. You'll have another episode that might come out a little early, that'll be coming. And that one, well, for what I have planned right now, I gotta tell you, it's going to be kind of a screamer, meaning I'm going to be getting hot and bothered and probably yelling, and just, I read things over the past week that just, it's not like necessarily things that are new. It's not like things I didn't know about already, but when it gets put together in a singular package, you can't help but, I'll just say it re-enrages you, and it's so maddening, but you're going to have to wait for that episode to hear about that. Something else was happening. So I was just reading, people know me. I love comic books, and I love comic books. I don't love Marvel. All right. I don't even really love DC. I love comic books in the abstract. All right. It's like you have to be careful when you say you love comic books today, because people instantaneously think that just means you like the Avengers or something. You realize there's more comic books out there than Marvel and Wonder Woman, right? Even though I do read Wonder Woman on the regular. Anyway, I was reading one of my longtime favorites. In fact, thankfully, they've had a really, really long run. I think they've been going since 2012, of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Woo! Man, I'm not kidding. IDW's been doing great work with that franchise for a long time. And most people don't even realize. Because TMNT is such a cultural icon and force that I don't think people realize just how not long or how short some of the runs of Ninja Turtles has been in the comic book industry, especially since that's where it started. Now, that gets to my point of where it started. Of course, we had those two great recent movies that's unbelievable to consider that they were produced by Michael Bay, and they ended up being fucking great, and they were. I reviewed them years ago on Sovereign Tech, and got some vindication, of course, from my dear and departed friend, Chris, about that. We both love the fuck out of those movies, and kudos to him for that. But anyway, the comic books have been phenomenal. And, speaking of the start, so, Ninja Turtles started off as a very adult, it was kind of a parody. It was really Deadpool before Deadpool was a thing. Don't worry, we got great questions to get into here. Not really much in the way of tech, but we have great questions to get into. I don't know if the lack of tech questions has caused some subscribers to drop as late. I'm not sure what exactly is behind that. It's fine. It happens. Sometimes people's financial situations change. I can certainly appreciate that. But anyway, what you want to hear on these, on these episodes, on the Q&As especially, you have total control. I will talk about what you send me. So anyway, we'll get into that. It's funny, like with Deadpool A originally, and I liked Deadpool back in the early 90s because he was serious as a heart attack. He was just this really hardcore, serious assassin. And me, as a barely even a teenager, he was a mutant. I thought that was really cool. And there was some connection of a history with Weapon X, things like this. And then Deadpool turns into basically the sideshow freak, which I'm sure he would love to be called if he were a real person. He becomes, just the comedy. And that's when I started to get annoyed by the character, mainly because, and I'm not being hipster, I'm being serious, mainly because She-Hulk which is a great character from Marvel and very underutilized overall. She was Deadpool before Deadpool was Deadpool, the Deadpool that people know from, those movies. She was the one breaking the fourth wall all the time, being very self-aware, talking to the audience, cracking jokes constantly, often bad jokes. I mean, I like Rob Liefeld just fine. I mean, really, like his work they did with Maximum Press with Battlestar Galactica is second to none. Real Battlestar Galactica. This is in the 90s before there were abominations that existed by, asshats like Ron Moore. Anyway, like, I think he just, whether he was behind the comedic turn for Deadpool or what, he basically just copied She-Hulk. Now, before that, okay, even before She-Hulk was really doing that, or around the same time, let's say, we're talking around 1985, 86, the Ninja Turtles, you have to understand, was actually like a parody, even though a very dark one, and violent one at that, of kind of the Avengers and a lot of this like tag team sort of superhero comic books. They were really meant to be a parody. And something that I forgot, and it wasn't until I was reading, I think it was the most recent issue of Urban Legends. That's a series, kind of a maxi series that IDW has going for TMNT. And I was reading that, and it just sunk in, and I was like, wait a minute. So Mirage Comics, which was the little kind of the imprint for Ninja Turtles that was created in the 80s by the creators of the Ninja Turtles, that being Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird, they started Mirage Comics in Dover, New Hampshire. I totally forgot about that. Like I don't know how, I don't know how I didn't remember that. Maybe I mentioned it before on Sovereign Tech, but for some reason I felt like I knew that. But then it just like re-clicked when I was reading this comic book. And it's not like anything in the comic book took place in New Hampshire or anything. It just kind of just instantly went off. I was like, wait a minute, wasn't this done in Dover? And because, where I'm existing, where I am a denizen of the geographic area known as New Hampshire now, or as I like to call it, Ice Planet Zero or the Silicon Mill Yard, Dover's not a terrible distance away. And so I see the signs for it now and then. And I don't know, maybe that's what made it click for me, but I would love, and I don't know where it is. And I mean, it's kind of a drive, to get there, but I'd be curious to know if like I could visit the original building where Mirage Comics was doing business and where they started printing out Ninja Turtles. I would love, just for the historicity of it, I'd love to visit that. That would be so cool. But, just to prove the point, I mean, lots of cool shit comes out of New Hampshire. Let's just call that ball. Sovereign Tech, Ninja Turtles. I mean, does it get any better than that? No, I didn't think so either. Fuck, Triple H? Woo! You know what I'm talking about. Man's out of Nashua. You believe that action? Unbelievable. Anyway, so that said, that out of the way, why don't we get into some of your questions? But I'm going to see about this. I'm going to see if I can visit the mecca of Ninja Turtledom, and like find out where exactly that was, where it happened. I don't know if I'd have to like get in touch with Kevin Eastman if he knew the address or something. If somebody's like living there, I don't want to harass them, of course. But it would be interesting to see where, that first ink was laid. You know what I mean? And Kevin Eastman, boy, talk about a guy who, that guy's lived a life. He ends up marrying, what's her name there? Julie K. Strain. Remember her? Holy shit. And if you don't remember her, look her up on your favorite search engine, because you're in for a good time. All right, so enough of that. Let's get into these questions. And a lot of these were asked. Actually, I got a great question in a tweet. In fact, let me see if I can go to it quick, because I want to bring it up. And I'm going to do, it might be like a bonus episode that I'll do for Zomia One. For the Zomia ONE Underground, or it might end up being something that I'll talk about maybe on I don't think I'm going to do it for a Q&A, but I might do it for a main episode of Sovereign Tech. Here's the tweet that I got. And it was from a guy named Malicious Egoist. Great name. Let's see. I vaguely remember, here he goes, at Sovereign Tech, I vaguely remember hearing you mention Fast and Furious being egoist in an episode of Sovereign Tech a few years ago, after hearing you on School Sucks. Do you have anything anywhere going deep into that? I've since really gotten really into Sterner and would love to hear that. So that actually plays off of some of the questions that I got here for this episode. First off, I don't find it uninteresting. Okay, now, again, I'm not making some kind of, I'm not patting myself on the back. I'm not making any kind of hipster argument or anything here. I've been an egoist. I've been espousing Sterner for probably, over 6 years. Let's just put it that way. Well over 6 years. And I have been asked many times. In fact, it's one of within the first probably 20 episodes of Sovereign Tech, I remember getting asked, because I used to have a Q&A section there within the show originally before it became its own episode. I was asked, what are the most important books for anarchism in your opinion? And I gave, or what was the most important book? And I said, you can't really just give one. I can give you an economic text, and then I'll give you a philosophical text, because those are two very different things. And yes, they are. And the book that I chose, and would still choose, as far as, maybe there's another one. I might change my mind on that. I would say, from a purely anarchist perspective, let's put it that way, the best economics book is Markets Not Capitalism by C4SS. It's a tremendous book. It's still a tremendous book. There's some, just from some of the most brilliant minds in the past century, frankly, that have their works included in that. And and a lot of modern minds, and it's very, very well done. And I'm so glad that book exists. An economic text that is not completely anarchist, even though I think it is kind of implicitly anarchist, is Sacred Economics by Charles Eisenstein. I think that is in fact, that book clearly quotes, it might take a little issue with, but it quotes Rothbard and others, and actually mentions Austrian economics within it. So don't think that it's some kind of like statist horseshit that's skipping something. No, this Charles Eisenstein knows what he's talking about, and I imagine at one point he was a very libertarian fellow. You can kind of glean that from his books, and I recommend all of his books. I'm not saying they're all perfect. Even Sacred Economics isn't perfect. I have some problems with what it's recommending, like with Demirage and things like this. But regardless, it does raise some really great points. Now, so those are I guess the economic texts that I would recommend. The philosophical anarchist text that I've always recommended as the top one to read is The Ego and Its Own by Max Stirner. And if you're going to ask me, I've already covered this before, but if you're going to ask me, I still recommend I think it's the Cambridge edition of The Ego and Its Own. In fact, I probably have it right here. I know you don't want to hear me going but I'm going so what are you going to do about that? Can't stop me, can you? Fuck. Well, I don't think I have it right there. I thought I had it right on my desktop, but I guess I don't. So, wait, here we go. Let's do this. I know you're getting this live commentary. Okay, there we are. And yeah, David Leopold. That's who I was thinking of. So there was the Cambridge Text in the History of Political Thought. That edition that's edited by David Leopold, which is based off of the translation that was commissioned by Benjamin Tucker, if I'm not mistaken. It was done by a guy, Steven something. I can't think of his name at the moment. Anyway, that's the one that I still recommend. Wolfie Landstreicher's edition, The Unique in Its Property, is a great translation. But as I've said many times, and I've reviewed that edition, I have a problem with his interpretation and his introduction to the book, where he basically says that you don't understand, Stirner was a prankster. And I just don't agree with that premise. I think that premise is just way off base. So I still recommend that one from Cambridge that was edited by David Leopold. It's from like the 90s. Anyway, you can find PDFs of it around. But yeah, The Ego in Its Own, I think that's just top notch. Now, that is the primary egoist text. And as that person who made the tweet said, Now they've gotten into sterner, and I'm glad that you did. I think that's fantastic. The point I was going to make, and again, I'm not making a hipster argument here. The point I was going to make is that, it's amazing to me how many people have kind of gotten in, especially in the past year or two. I really do think, let's call this, okay. President Trump, Big Orange. He did not drain the swamp, obviously. He has not really changed anything away from one version of the status quo. Okay. What he did change, though, is that I think he was very much a crucible. He was a crucible in the online movement of libertarianism and anarcho-capitalism. I think he just kind of split everybody on that. And a lot of people ran in his direction. Other people went egoist, and they became what you might want to call like a post-right or something like that. I mean, those terms get kind of crazy, but they became more of an egoist. And then some people, frankly, they became, maybe liberal, maybe even statist liberal outside of that. But he really, when he started campaigning, that was the nail in the coffin of the online liberty movement. And in a very real way, the liberty movement was always online. There was, even as far as I understand it, like PorcFest attendance has gone down significantly for varying reasons over the years. I could be wrong about that. And if you want to give me hell about it, go for it. Okay. That's fine. But in many ways, it always was an online movement. And it never saw any, and part of that came from the fact that, and look, I support people arguing and getting to, the nature, reality, and the truth. And there is such a thing as an objective truth. I support that all the way that people do those sorts of things. But everyone they couldn't stop arguing. And it's one thing to argue. It's another thing for you to think you have to be right. Okay. Again, there is an objective truth, but that for every little thing, you've got to be right. And because of that attitude, and again, the insertion of President Trump, I think that just blew the whole thing up, and people just went to whatever more entrenched side that existed at the time. But I have noticed in the past couple of years, and again, because of that a lot more people who would have been libertarian or anarcho-capitalist or something are going more towards this egoist bent. And I couldn't be happier. I think that's a very fine and wonderful thing, to occur. So that said, I appreciate also that, I'm not just pulling this out of my ass, that, I have made the claim in the past that the Fast and Furious franchise is very, very egoist. I haven't done an episode, as the person asked. I have not done an episode where I've done a real deep dive on it. I've mentioned it very briefly, like how, Dom's family is basically a union of egoists. They really just do whatever is, expedient and what is within their capability to do. If they have to, they might work with the government or with some authoritarianism for a minute. But as soon as that gets in their way, they're like, fuck you. And they go and they do their own thing. There's a lot of parts of it that in abstract or even more explicitly really is egoist. And so I'd like to do that deep dive because it's very rare that we get actual entertainment that has real philosophy behind it. Because most of the time what we get is you get, a bunch of morons who think that somehow Firefly is libertarian. No, it's not. And Joss Whedon is the most statist motherfucker. Give me a break. It's not even remotely close, not even on accident is it libertarian. And it reminds me of and I remember years ago, there were people who said, this is back when there were only 3 Halo games, that, if you really look at it, the Halo games are very Christian. They're about the Trinity. It's like, no, they're fucking Halo games and they're about blowing the shit fucking up. Maybe that is actually the history of Christianity for a lot of certain types and denominations of Christians, not all. But goddamn, stop trying to read shit into these things. But this isn't a case where I'm reading shit into them. The writer, Chris Morgan, of the Fast and Furious franchise, he clearly is a student of some kind of philosophy, or a student of philosophy in general, because he brings a lot of it up in Fate of the Furious with the character of Cypher. She lays out like choice theory, some actual philosophy, whether it goes by those names or not. Anyway, I will, and again, I think that the reason why, I'll say this quickly, but I just to suggest that I'm going to give you a deeper dive on this stuff in the near future. But suffice it to say that I think the reason that these movies really appeal to so many people isn't necessarily because they're down to the lowest common denominator. It's because they are egoist, and humans in a state of nature are egoist, and people don't realize it, but it is appealing to all of their desires and needs, whether they realize it or not. And I think that's part of why these movies, out of nowhere, are huge hits. Every single one of them, are just massive, and it's this crazy franchise out of nowhere that has nothing to do with the original film. So it's not like, you're just holding on to people from 10, 15 years ago, or actually like 18 years ago, almost 20 years ago. It's not that. There's something that is appealing to people in these films. Okay. And these films are not making political electoral politics. They're not making political statements. There's not it doesn't have the dumbass message of hope that like laces the Marvel movies and even Star Wars movies or anything like that. It is just, there's something there that is primal, that is appealing to people, and I think it is egoism. So anyway, I will get into a deeper dive on that, but I want to do a really, really solid job on that one, because it's probably something I would end up cutting out and sharing on YouTube. And maybe that would help get people into egoism, get them into philosophy out of nowhere. Because normally I hate those kind of books too, right? Where it's like Battlestar Galactica and philosophy. It's like, oh, give me a fucking break. Like, that show had no plan. It couldn't possibly have a philosophy. Get out of here. So, but this is a case where I genuinely think they do. Anyway, let's get into some of the other questions here. And these were comments made on episodes, via the Podbean app, or via the, Zomia1.com, via the website, where you can comment right on, each episode on the sounds right underneath. It's such a great feature, and I'm glad people are using it. I love it when people communicate with me this way. So anyway, here we go. Of course, there's always the email address, bbs@sovereigntech.com. All right. Let's see. I missed the episode, and this is referencing last week's Q&A, where we talked about the book Might is Right, by Ragnar Redbeard, and the problems and not problems with that book. He says, I missed the episode where you discussed Might is Right. Was that a Q&A? So to answer that question quick, it was last week's, you might have just missed last week's Q&A, and that it would be Q&A 160? It was episode, Underground episode 327, I think. Anyway, going on. So yes, that's where I talked about it. This book has, actually, I think it's the episode you commented on. So I didn't have another episode beyond that where I talked about Might is Right, if that's what you're wondering. Sorry, I think that's what you're really asking. I didn't have a previous episode of that, but we'll talk about that. This book has always interested me because it was an inspiration for the Satanic Bible, which was life-changing. It is definitely a book where you take the good stuff and leave the garbage behind. So I want to stop on that for a second. Yes, as I stated, it was an inspiration, and in earlier editions of the Satanic Bible, Anton LaVey makes it very clear that Ragnar Redbeard is one of his inspirations. It is also what got me to read, it's what made me find out about Might is Right, was reading the Satanic Bible, actually, when I was a teenager. So, and I agree that book is absolutely life-changing. The Satanic Bible really, really is. Even though I would argue, and we'll talk about this, and I said it last week, I would argue that a lot of it is, and I mean, he gives credit to Ayn Rand as well, the Satanic Bible really is, in many ways, is objectivism. Like, I don't think that the lines where one differs from the other only comes into where Ayn Rand has like her own little personal tastes, like where she doesn't think women can be leaders and shit like this, or women could be the president or something. But anyway, we'll go on from that. But I also agree with your statement about Might is Right, that it's a book where you take the good stuff and you leave the garbage behind. And there is plenty of garbage in it. There's no doubt. But the good stuff, well, let's call it, the good stuff is really good, and it is very cutting commentary and content. It's very cutting, and it's stuff that in most books, no one would really get away with saying. I think it took a book getting published in the 19th century to, for those kind of comments, basically egoism in a very real way, to be, allowed to get out there by any kind of publisher. Today, minus now, thanks to various developments. Now you have a lot of niche publishers and you have Amazon where you can publish fucking anything. Now anybody can say anything, but there's a good amount of time in the 20th century and early 21st where you were a little shit out of luck as far as getting exposure if you had some really root striking things to say. It's not always true, but anyway, so just in general, I think that was very true. So yeah, it is a book where, yep, there's horrible shit in it. But then there's stuff in it that is not. So there you go. Reading on, let's see. I have heard different people over the years conjecture that a lot of the racism was meant as satire, but have never really understood the argument behind that supposition. Have you encountered this before? What are your thoughts? And I will comment on that, but let me read on. The new authoritative version was recently released by Reverend Slaughter's outfit, Underworld Amusements. I received the pre-order version of this edition, but have not had a chance to read it cover to cover. From what I can tell, it is the most complete version out there, and the annotations are extremely thorough. Have you had a chance to look at this new edition, and what are your thoughts on it? I have not had the chance. I did get it ordered. I have not had the chance to look over this book, the complete edition of Might is Right. I am a big fan of these kinds of releases. I love these kinds of books where you get like a lot of the annotations and you get a lot of maybe alternative versions that you can look at while, in footnotes while you're reading the text and everything. One of my favorite ones for this, actually, believe it or not, is a book called, and it's not from Underworld Amusements, it's actually from the Navy, from like the Naval whatever Institute. They published a complete edition back in the 90s, the 1990s, of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And that is a very, very interesting an interesting book to read in its complete form with a lot of the annotations and explanations and alternative text. That book's a masterpiece anyway, and an anarchist masterpiece at that. And yes, it is. It is explicitly anarchist. That's why I'm blown away that the U.S. Navy would bother to publish the damn thing, especially in such a beautiful edition. But, yeah, I love it when these kinds of things come out, even if they're books. Like, I think there should be, and there are more complete editions of, like I said last week, of like Mein Kampf. You have these books out there so that you can see, so that you can keep an eye out, so you have warnings of what this shit looks like when it starts rearing its ugly head again. Okay. And I made the same argument last week for Might is Right, that it's a book that, even though it is deeply flawed in many areas, it is a book that should stay in print so that we can keep an eye out for that language. In fact, another book that I mentioned in the same vein was a book called White Power by George Lincoln Rockwell. This book is terrible stem to stern. But it's as I said, it's amazing how many right-wing commentators and whatever, I don't know, people who think that they're edgy or something like that. It's amazing how many of them seem to almost verbatim quote that book. You don't know that they're quoting that book, but they're saying the same damn thing. And also, interestingly, actually, I noticed on the Pirate Bay just a couple days ago, somebody posted an audiobook version of White Power. And I think, or I can't help but wonder, because this has happened a few times, where I'll talk about a book and then suddenly it shows up on the Pirate Bay. I think a certain intrepid Sovereign Tech or Zomia One listener is, doing the Dark Lord's work. And I mean that in a good way, of making this content available, which of course I do myself as well. Anyway, so, yeah, this idea, have I heard that people conjecture that the racism and a lot of the things in it was meant to be a satire? The racism of the time, so that book came out, 1896, something like that, is when Might is Right came out. At the time, saying nasty things, frankly, about Jews and blacks was, well, I'll just call it in America, that was fucking order of the day. Most, I dare say, most Americans wouldn't disagree, that at the time, they would have said, I mean, this is the same time that the book, The Jews and Negro came out, a lot of these other ones. I mean, they really, the more racist aspects of what Ragnar Redbeard says in Might is Right would not have been the controversial thing in that book at the time. The more controversial stuff would have been, you know, kind of the more egoist leaning aspects, or the egoist aspects of what Ragnar Redbeard wrote. But the racist stuff, no, most Americans wouldn't have had a problem with that. What, saying, you know, Jews are this, or, you know, black people are this? No. Of course they thought that. And, you know, not going to get into any Abraham Lincoln shit. That's a whole other conversation. But there you go. I mean, you know, because remember also that, and there's a great work by Edwin Black, who very clearly laid out that the eugenics movement didn't start in Nazi Germany. The eugenics movement in the late 19th century, early 20th century that inspired Nazi Germany started in the United States and was, I mean, widely received. So it's funny. You know, I mean, people are like, oh, that book's terrible. It says these horrible things. Yeah, it does. Okay. But also, that's not the part of this book that was even like revolutionary. You know, like that's nothing. As far as it being satirical, that's usually the argument that I've heard gets brought up about this book, is that it was meant to be satire because it was satiring what Americans thought at the time. Like there's arguments that this book was written by Jack London. Then there's people who do textual analysis and say, no, it wasn't. I mean, I don't know where I sit on that. Ragnar Redbeard is, you know, clearly a pseudonym. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But the idea that the racist aspects were satire, I don't know. That gets into those kind of arguments, and I hear it from egoists all the time. That speaks to what I was talking about earlier with the unique in its property, where Wolfie Landstreicher is saying that he's almost saying that the heart of egoism is consistent satire. And I just don't agree with that. I don't agree with that at all. And basically saying that Stirner, there's a lot of times where Stirner is cracking a joke. He's not being serious when he's, you know, talking, when he's trying to debunk a major philosopher of his day. He's playing the philosopher's game, but he's ultimately playing a game with the philosopher. And I just don't believe that. Like Wolfie Landstreicher would say, and look, I respect Wolfie, okay? Don't confuse me. And I respect his work. And, you know, his translation of Stirner's Critics is essential, in my opinion, for an egoist library. Absolutely essential. Anyway, he would say, like, when Stirner is talking about the different epochs of the human condition, okay, like you have kind of the spiritual epoch, the more realist epoch, and then what Stirner was hoping would come, which is the egoist epoch. He said, no, he was kidding about the egoist epoch. That's never actually going to happen. And I don't agree with that at all. Again, it raises, if you go with this idea that the person is laying out satire, I mean, maybe it's possible. There's another example I'm going to bring up where people make a similar claim. But suddenly you don't know what's real or not within these books. And then I think the book basically becomes meaningless if everything is open to some kind of interpretation like that, or where everything might just be satirical. Here's another example where it might be true, but maybe not. And that is The Prince by Niccolo Machiavelli. There's an argument that the book The Prince wasn't actually a guidebook on how to become a tyrant. Okay. It was actually a guidebook of how to watch out for tyrants and to avoid falling under their power. It was a warning, not a guide, you see. That's the argument that gets made. Now, that's not arguing that it's satirical, but that is arguing that it had a completely different purpose than what was originally there. I think that if Might is Right by Ragnar Redbeard, if half of it is satire, but then the other half is absolute, or well, I don't want to say absolute, and the other half is, shall we say, egoist truth, that's a very odd way to write something. Like you either make the whole thing satire, like Gulliver's Travels, right? Or don't bother, because no one's going to be able to know when you're kidding, or, no one's going to know what truth you're actually trying to parlay. And so the book becomes a problem at that point. And again, I dare say almost becomes meaningless. Now, in the complete edition that Underworld Amusements put out there, that might suggest, that, and maybe they have some notes that kind of point to that. If I find that out, I will talk about it. Okay, on a Q&A. Actually, after I read the book, I'm going to do a full review, so I would talk about it there. I'll do a full review of the complete edition of Might is Right. But yeah, I know these arguments come up a lot, but I don't think that that's so. But also, I think that all the racist and anti-Semitic aspects of that book are not the revolutionary or the parts that even matter, because they're the parts that are status quo with late 19th century, early 20th century America. There's nothing crazy about that stuff when he says it in there. It's all of the egoist stuff that he lays out, where that is what's revolutionary. So I don't know. I mean, that's really what I've got on that aspect of that. So, but I will read the book and I will do a review of it. I assure you, I'm actually very excited to read this complete edition. I'm curious what comes out of it. I collect, and from Underworld Amusements, at that matter, I collect and actually get ebook copies made, because Underworld Amusements often doesn't. A lot of the books that they put out there, and a lot of these rarer egoist texts that they have brought back to light. Okay, so now there's a second part to what this person asked, and I want to read that. Also, it sounds like you have read at least some of Magus Gilmore's work. Now, the way you're talking about Reverend Slaughter, of course, it's Kevin Slaughter of Underworld Amusements. Magus Gilmore, of course, it's Peter Gilmore, who I talked about last week. Clearly, you're a Satanist. So, and I think you say as much here. And rock on. So anyway, you've read at least some of Magus Gilmore's work, and I'm sure that probably means his collection of essays, The Satanic Scriptures. Stanley Breaking In? Yes, that's exactly what that means. That's one of those books that I bought from Underworld Amusements and got turned into an ebook. It's on my Kindle right now. Anyway, I think it would be a very interesting episode to hear you review The Satanic Scriptures, or perhaps the Satanic Bible in more depth. It would be interesting to hear a review from an egoist who is not also a Satanist. The vast majority of egoists whom I have met are also Satanists, so I feel that yours would be a unique perspective, at least to me. So I have read the Satanic Scriptures. I don't know that I'm exactly prepared right now so I think we're going to move on to other questions here. Actually, there is a tech comment to make, or that's a response to a Sovereign Tech episode. But yeah, I would like to do that, to do a review of the Satanic Scriptures. Maybe I'll do them back to back. I have so many book reviews to do, but maybe I'll do them back to back, where we do the Satanic Scriptures, and I'll do Might is Right after that. I will say that a lot of the Satanic Scriptures, a lot of what Peter Gilmore wrote down, I agree with. I mean, I thought was tremendous. I mean, there's a lot within Satanism that I'm totally on board with. Again, a lot of it is really just objectivism. In a very real way, which is kind of ironic, because Satanists would argue for an objective reality as to where, like, say, Wolfie Landstreicher, who's done really the yeoman's work in translating a lot of egoist texts, as well as writing a lot of his own egoist works. Like he wrote the Egoist Encyclopedia, which is not a very large book at all. And I think I've reviewed that in the past as well. But he makes it very clear in his opinion, there is no objective reality. Like everything is perception. And I mean, I don't know if he's not going like to some sophist extreme, I don't think, but yeah, I mean, his understanding of egoism seems to stand in some contrast to what I have experienced of Satanism. So, I don't know where Wolfie sits in that, if he considers himself a Satanist or not. I don't know. So yeah, I do like what a lot of what Peter Gilmore has to say there. While I believe in an it's not a believe, I think it's a fact. Okay. While there is an objective reality, I do understand where perception, makes a play in that being, like the map is not the territory, right? Like Korzybski would say. I'm not so much, here's the thing, folks. I'm not so much the objectivist, even with a small o. I dig it. I get it. I think it has some very important things to say. Capital objectivism has all kinds of problems, right? Because basically you argue for governments and a lot of these other things. Small O objectivism, not so much of an issue. But I am a major proponent of general semantics. And so I feel like there are, and I'm going to do a reread, okay? I'll do a little bit of a reread, a refresher on the Satanic Scriptures so that I can do a proper review. But I feel like within Satanism, there are things within Satanism that stand in contrast to general semantics. And so that's why I can't really get totally on board with that, in that way. Even though I do say Hail Satan and all of that stuff, I don't really fit in, even though I'm supportive of in many ways, I don't really fit in as a Satanist in that sense. But I'll do a review on that, and I will talk about that. I agree that would be a fascinating conversation, and I want to do that. So, okay, let's move on to a couple other questions here. And again, I will do a review of Might is Right. I hope I answered your question about, whether or not it's satire. I know that's what you're getting at. I think it's important to lay a lot of this out. And maybe there's a lot here. But folks, if you are interested in, egoism, you've gotten a laundry list of books and resources to look into, that were listed off just in this Q&A. So, okay, let's go to this. Now, this is in reference to episode 336 of Sovereign Tech, which was the Cult of Netflix. People really enjoyed that episode as well. Here's actually from the same person who's just asking about egoism and Satanism. It says, my understanding is that not only will the military not give you resources, but they will also leverage copyright law against you to prevent you from using actual military uniforms, camouflage patterns, phrases, and other IP that they quote-unquote own if you don't play ball with them. Now, this was in reference to my opening conversation about Top Gun Maverick, the movie that's coming out. And, we talked about how, because I talked about it years and years ago on Sovereign Tech, that there was that expose from Extreme Tech that talked about how the military really had a lot of control and sway over Hollywood. Because they would give them deals, and some of what this listener is suggesting, they would give them a lot of easy access to, military stuff. We'll just put it that way. And because of that, and the expenses that go along with, any kind of action using guns and a lot of these, and airplanes or, jets and whatever else, it's a very attractive thing. And maybe the only way to get it within your budget for a Hollywood movie to get made that features any kind of modern day military or maybe even slightly futuristic one. I'm not 100% clear on whether or not that they would try and leverage copyright law against you, as far as using actual military uniforms and things like this. An interesting story that I just read 2 days ago. And this question, I think, was asked 6 days ago. But something I read 2 days ago was there's a show that CBS was making. It only went one season. And the show was called The Code. If I can remember, I'll put the story that I read in the show notes for this episode, but I might forget. I might not remember it. Anyway, it was a show called The Code, which was basically a Marine, I think it was meant to be a Marine version of the show JAG, which was about the Navy, lawyer, unit, institute, whatever, or institution, I'll just call it that. And the interest, what the article was laying out is that it was very weird, but it said that CBS and the creators of the show what happened is the show came out, even just the trailer, and military vets were watching it, and they're like, wow, this has wild inaccuracies. This is way off base. This looks ridiculous. And so there's a lot of really, negative response to it. Just the trailer. First episode drops, same thing happens. A lot of U.S. vets come out and start saying, what the fuck is that? Like, you got this all wrong. He's wearing the wrong ribbons. You would never be allowed to have that haircut. This wouldn't work this way, blah, blah, blah. And in the article, they're laying out how the producers and writers of The Code did not play ball with the U.S. military at all. And yet they still made the show. Of course, they got a lot of things wrong. And I don't know if they ever, you might be right, because what I saw of it, I mean, there's no way I'm going to watch a fucking show like that. even for review purposes, I'm not going to watch a show like that. Talk about trauma. Unless you're going to show the military like in Jurassic World, getting eaten to pieces by the Indominus Rex or some shit. Sorry. Okay. I can't do it. I'm not going to watch it. Not multiple hours. I can handle a couple hours, but not anyway, I'm not going to do it. So it's interesting, but maybe that played into this, but then maybe, I don't know, maybe it goes to show that CBS doesn't have to play, or, that Hollywood sometimes doesn't have to play ball with it, but then look what happened, right? The show ended up tanking because of its lack of fidelity, which is an argument that gets brought up a lot, that we've brought up a lot on Zomia ONE about Star Wars and Star Trek. In fact, something that we'll probably get to in a future Sovereign Trek and a future TIE Fighter Renegades, a deal just went down. CBS just became Viacom CBS. It's not even just CBS anymore. Now CBS owns all of Star Trek. They own the movies as well. So that 25% rule that we've talked about often with the subject of entertainment is dead, or that we talked about in Sovereign Trek as well as TFR, that is no longer an issue. And there's a conversation to have around that, and we'll have it. I've also heard, though, that with Star Wars, you kind of have a similar problem going on, okay, where George Lucas makes money when characters that he created, when Star Wars is under his purview, he gets some royalties from that. And so Star Wars may have to, this is just rumor, but Star Wars might have to have that 25% difference that Star Trek, up until like yesterday, as this recording in August of 2019, had to have as well. But the issues with these things is that you lose fidelity. And that's why maybe a lot of people think that a lot of the Star Wars that's coming out, it kind of sucks. Why? Because you're not getting the Star Wars that you knew and loved. Why does Discovery suck ass? It's because we're not getting the Star Trek we knew and loved because of, problems with IP, with intellectual property, with copyright law, and a lot of this other stuff. And maybe the same thing happened with The Code, where it's meant to be a military show. It should have been an instant hit, but because it didn't pay fidelity to the reality of the military, and maybe that was because they didn't want to play ball with the military and see what they could get away with, perhaps. I don't know, maybe CBS was trying to run roughshod and say, we're not going to, be under the thumb of the U.S. government anymore, which understand that there was a time 60, 70 years ago where Hollywood, the entertainment industry, was absolutely at odds with the U.S. government. Absolutely, they were at odds. In fact, I think that's why the whole, McCarthyism, communism scare, the place where the communism scare really affected shit was in Hollywood. That's where it got really ugly. And basically the government took control via the military and these, cuts that you could get in your budget and a lot of these other things, and maybe even tax cuts that you can get here and there. All of that, McCarthyism and this, the communist scare, that gave the U.S. government very real control, or at the very least talents sunk in to the entertainment industry. And maybe CBS is trying to go back to where, no, we'll do whatever the fuck we want. I don't know. That's just a guess. So as far as it being that the military, what this listener commented on, as far as the military leveraging copyright law, against them and, not letting them use camouflage and things like this, I'm not sure on that part, but you might be right. And that could explain why a show like The Code and some other things may have failed in the past. I'm also thinking of another show like Pensacola Wings of Gold, which was quite a hit. But I don't think that they played well with the military either, and that caused a lot of problems. But anyway, regardless, that's a very interesting conversation to have. But yeah, I could believe it that that's true, that that's how far it goes. And that basically, if you want to show the military at all, you have to play nice with the military and show the military in a very kind light. Which I could imagine, I could see where the military might not like The Code, because as far as I could see, it's with a lot of young people. So it's basically JAG 90210. That's what it looked like. But, and that's not to insult 90210. But regardless, there's that. So, okay, let's get on to the next bit. And this is actually, as I asked in that episode, I said, you don't really need, we were talking about software that, like the great software has already been made. You don't need the latest editions and all that. They're selling you bullshit with all the new versions of new software. The example I brought up was Adobe Photoshop. And I said, and I directly called out to my brother. I said, Robin Freebeard, he could probably tell us different, that, you don't need the latest version of of Photoshop to do what you do. And you got to understand how great of a graphic designer Rob is. I mean, he's fucking awesome. But anyway, he commented and he responded to my call and said, I haven't moved beyond CS6 and I probably never will. So I said CS2, but CS6, I mean, that's still a few versions back. There you go. You don't need it. Like they're peddling bullshit on you with a lot of the new software, a lot of the new operating systems. There's interesting stuff happening in the Linux space, but as far as within the Mac OS and the Windows space, there's nothing new under the sun. So, and that's coming from an absolutely trained professional, which Robin is. And it shows. I know. I've seen his work. His work is on display on Zomia ONE. I mean, look at the cover artwork for TIE Fighter Renegade. It's fucking gorgeous. So, anyway, I mean, that's... I'm sure to him, that's like not even his best work. I don't know, but it blows my mind, and I think it's stunning. So, anyway, those are great comments to get in. I love it when you interact with things that I've said on Sovereign Tech and that we can bring them up and talk about them and expand upon them a bit here. Or give answers to things that I call out on the main shows. I really do enjoy that. It's part of the reason that these Q&A episodes exist. So a lot to get into, there, or a lot that we've gotten into with all this. So why don't we go ahead and shake it up and let's get to our, we'll get to our album of the week. How about that? We'll keep this one under an hour. I feel like it's been a while since one of these Q&A episodes has actually been under an hour. I'm going to tell you about, this is going to be a little bit of a different pick. Because usually I do like a metal album or something, right? In fact, the past couple weeks, the album of the week has been from like a Christian guy or a Christian band. In fact, I'll tell you another one that I'm looking forward to. I know Michael Sweet of Striper. He has a new album coming out beginning of October. I just heard the new song off of that, or the lead single off of that. It was fucking great. And I knew it would be. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Striper. Huge fan. Which, again, kills me that, whatever. I already talked about this, Christians getting offended. But moving on. So this is going to be something a little bit different. It is not a metal album. Not exactly. I mean, I tag it. I'll tell you, when I do my MP3 tags, and I spend a lot of time tagging my music. I am quite the librarian when it comes to my shit, and I have a lot of it. I do tag them as metal. Basically anything with an electric guitar, just about anything with an electric guitar, I tag as metal. There are exceptions to that. Like Chicago has plenty of electric guitar. In fact, I mean, Terry Katz was arguably the greatest guitarist of all time with an electric guitar. I mean, he's the one that inspired Jimi Hendrix. How do you get more metal than that, But there are Chicago and some others where I don't really classify them as metal, and I might classify them as actual rock. Toto, I would even think of that. Rick Springfield, perhaps. Big fans of all of those. But this one I do label as metal. It's kind of got a good rolling thunder of a drum and of a bass beat and of and an electric guitar through a lot of it. Could be classified as pop. Basically, it's not my standard fare. And I was debating on whether or not to share this with you because I feel like this music is very cheesy. Not just very cheesy, ridiculously cheesy. Like cheesy beyond Stan Bush. Like you expect Stan Bush to be cheesy, even though I don't think he's cheesy at all. I think his music's fucking great. But this stuff, I get it, where it could be seen as that kind of cheese, but I think it's goddamn brilliant. And if you have ever, in your life, and I have, if you've ever gone through shit, if you've ever gone through a tough time, and you've had maybe years where you went through a tough time, I really think this music sings to you. It sings. I really do. I mean, and you want to call it cheesy and you want to say, oh, this is like popular or whatever fucking shit. Well, then for once, I'm picking something as popular. Hopefully that proves I'm not just some fucking hipster, because I hate getting accused of that, because it's just not true. The band is called The Score, okay? And they've been around for a few years. I think their first release might have been like an EP, came out in 2015. Then they did a full album release in 2017 with an album called Atlas. Atlas is a very good album. Very good album, and there's a lot of music on there. These guys know their strengths, and I'm going to explain how. But anyway, they came out when I first heard them. I think I was watching Titan Games, The Rock's show little competition there that he had on NBC on Thursday nights, which I did a review of, and I wasn't entirely impressed with it. But regardless, I heard one of their songs. It was a song called Glory, and it was off of an EP, an extended play. It was off of an EP called Pressure that came out in February of 2019. And that's when I first heard of the score. And I was like, wow, that song was kind of cool. What the hell is that? And I listened to the EP of Pressure, and I loved it. It's very simple, like 5 tracks on it. Or 6 tracks, actually. Most of the songs, they're well under 4 minutes. Some are even under 3 minutes. Okay. But it's a 6-track album, or, EP. They just came out with a few days ago. They came out with an EP called Stay. And Stay is also, it's another 6-track album, or 6-track EP. And I think both of those EPs, Pressure and Stay, are track for track. Every song is dynamite, in my opinion. It absolute dynamite. It has a, how to even describe this sound? There's like a very simple drum beat. If you ever heard the song Jungle by X Ambassadors, you're going to know what I'm talking about. It's that kind of a sound. But there's an electric guitar that plays. It's rock. I mean, I think they get listed as like indie alternative, whatever the fuck that means. But I love it. It's inspirational stuff. It's stuff about, I fell down, but I'm going to come back stronger. That kind of shit, which I don't think the world has. I know that, what do they call it? Struggle porn. It's one thing when bloggers do that, because fucking anybody can blog, and yes, they can. I mean, yeah, there's people who are like great writers and they happen to be bloggers, but can anybody blog? Yes. Okay. That's why they're Z-class celebrities. I'm not insulting anybody. I mean, any of my listeners have a blog. Good for you. I even had a blog for a while, and did daily content. I know the deal. Okay. But like, to do this kind of music, and I have to appreciate, here's the thing. You don't have to today, in my opinion, there is no need to release a full album. And I've said this before. You don't need to do 18 tracks anymore, because you're not going to sell music for $20 a pop anymore. Like, you don't have to put in the value add. Everybody might as well do EPs today, a little 6-track EP. This one, I mean, I don't even think it goes 15 minutes. But it's some of the most powerful 15 minutes I've ever heard in my life. There's a song on here that's not even 2 minutes long, but it's great. Like, I like it. Good, simple. They know that if they went long with any of this shit, it would be overdone and repetitive. Okay? And does the EP Stay sound the same as EP The Pressure? Yeah, they sound almost exactly alike. But because it's just like the short hit of it, and it's not like this full album or whatever, it works. Like, they get away with it because they're not overstaying their welcome. And again, I also, I appreciate a good, simple, short song. Fuck yeah. Like Godsmack's new album, Legends Rise. Is that the name of it? Every song on there, I think, is either 3 minutes or less. And that works. Get in there with a heavy guitar, get the intensity, get the blood flowing, and then leave. You don't have to do Stairway to Heaven anymore, because no one's ever going to do Stairway to Heaven again. Judas Priest can get away with a 13-minute song. Dream Theater can get away with a 28-minute song. Folks, I hate to tell you, there ain't going to be any more Dream Theaters or Judas Priests. They're not going to come again. Go in with these really, shorter hits, unless you're going to, bring in some synth and a lot of other stuff like, say, Beast in Black does. Then maybe you can get away with 6 minutes. But like, these opuses just aren't going to happen anymore. So I appreciate, maybe some people might pull it off, but in general, you get my point, is that it's just, we don't live in that world anymore with music. I appreciate what the score is doing. I think they're very smart guys. They know they play to their strengths. They know how to put a very tight, cohesive musical presentation together. And I was very impressed with Stay. I listened to it. I was working out at the gym last night, and it was great. I listened to the whole damn EP, and I wasn't even half done with my workout. It was phenomenal. And then I could put on Hailstorm and Alice Cooper after that. Because you better fucking believe I put on Alice Cooper, do a little Brutal Planet, or Do Not Disturb with Hailstorm, you bet your ass. So yeah, check out the score if you haven't. Yeah, I know it's cheesy, but if you've been there, and I don't know what these guys went through in their life, maybe they're just pulling a rabbit out of their hat, I don't know. But if you've been there, what this very simple music, but powerful music is talking about, you're going to feel this shit. I guarantee it. So anyway, the score, both of their EPs really, Pressure and Stay, but Stay I thought was really solid. So you can check that one out, but you're going to want to listen to their entire catalog after you listen to any one of these. And it does it all kind of sound the same? Well, yeah, but so does fucking AC/DC, right? So does Airborne. I mean, there's plenty of bands that all their shit kind of sounds the same. That doesn't stop it from like being something that, you know, is going to make you kick ass when you listen to it. So there you go with the score. Anyway, all right, I'm going to wrap this baby up, keep it just around an hour. And, well, anyway, more content to come, more episodes of Sovereign Tech, of course, throughout the month of August. We got a great time for you. And, you know, TIE Fighter Renegades. I would like to get some more Hard and Fast podcasts out this month. And anyway, plenty to come for you. You know it. You know I got your hookup. I will see all of you on the other side.